Lisa Walsh is a social worker and a mum of 3 boys. She's also written her first play called Love in the Wild. It's currently running in the Axis Theatre in Ballymun. When its director Peter Sheridan was in with us a few weeks ago, he said you have to talk to Lisa. So now we're talking to Lisa. Good morning to you, Lisa. How are you?
Bobby.
You're very welcome. Now, thanks for coming in. Tell us a little bit about yourself. First of all, you're a social worker who's effectively got into art and drama. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
How did that all come about?
Well, I've been a social worker for about 20 years. I went back as a mature student when I was 25 and studied social work in Trinity. And when I graduated, I worked as an addiction worker in Ballymun, which is where I'm from. So I went back there, worked as an addiction worker. Then I worked as a medical social worker. And since then, I've been in child protection.
Okay.
About 4 years ago, I did a course in Ballymun in the Axis Theatre. It was called a Ride-On course. It was just something I did. It was facilitated by Colm Keegan, who's a poet and a writer. And the idea was we were asked to write something about old and new Ballymun. So I did it as a hobby and came away with a short story about a guy who goes for a swim. Now, it was based on my time there as an addiction worker, where one of the men that I worked with told me about an experience he had. The bats in Ballymun were very important growing up. They're a huge part of people's childhood.
Yeah.
A very happy space for us in Ballymun. And he was a brilliant swimmer when he was a little lad, and so was I. Most kids in Ballymun thought they were great swimmers, even if they weren't. It was because the staff were so good and we spent a lot of time at the pool. But he told me this story where he decided to go back as an adult to go for a swim. He was on methadone, an ex-heroin user, and when he went in for a swim, he had a really bad experience and left because he said he felt like a junkie and he was very self-conscious, and that stayed with me. So 20 years later, when I was on this course and I was asked to write the old and the new, there's a new pool in Ballymun now, and the old pool is gone. And there's so much traditional association with the old pool for me around. There's a couple of things. You go for your swim and you come out and you'd have your Chester slice, which is your cake and Manning's. It was just part of the whole
Manning's
warmth
bakery.
of it. Yeah. And anybody I know, if you talk to anybody in Ballymun, they'll talk about Chester slices. So I wrote this short story and it was received really well. And my partner, Anto Siri, is the actor in the show that I'm here about today, Love in the Wild. And he performed it. It was a short story, but he kind of performed a spoken word piece. And people responded very well to it. Peter Sheridan seen it. And he said to me, you know what, that seems really good to me. I think you should devise it for stage. So I did that. I devised it as a monologue, an 8-minute monologue. And Peter invited Anto to support him in his show, Are You Having a Laugh? Performing the monologue about the swimming and a separate one, The Lift.
Can I ask you, Lisa, and you say you worked as an addiction counsellor and that, is there a kind of a dark humour in this?
Yes.
Is this a way of getting maybe through some of these really, really troublesome addiction kind of situations, that you actually use humour as a way of sort of coping? Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Working as an addiction worker was something that I did because I have an interest in addiction. I'm also intrigued about how people cope with addiction, their coping skills around addiction. My mum had an addiction problem for all of my life, and she was on a different frequency to most people.
Yeah.
And I found that quite intriguing. Like, her way of coping would have been she loved nature and she loved children. And the character in this play, Ger Duffy, is similar. So if she was faced with, when she was stressed out, that's kind of how she'd cope, nearly like mindfulness. And she was very funny. So there's a lot of humour in this story with Ger and Love in the Wild, and she would have told her story with humour. It's a working class thing also, you know, around how you cope with things. You find the funny parts even in the deeper stuff.
Yeah, and I presume you have to be careful though that you're not laughing at the addiction itself.
Yeah.
That there's a very fine balance in how the humour is actually used.
Yeah, and that's the skill of working with Peter and Anto. And Peter Sheridan is the director, as you know, and he's a genius of finding the moments and finding pathos and sadness, and also keeping, like, the character. You're absolutely right. That was very important to me, that it wasn't a patronising portrayal. The character Ger Duffy is actually very brave, and he's not a stereotype of an addict. In fact, his addiction is only part of the story, and that was very important to myself and Peter and Anto. And as part of the process, we workshopped it in addiction agencies and recovery agencies with people who are living with addiction, and they gave us the green light. You know, we got a really good response. We toured for the last 6 months, and people felt we were hitting the right notes and that we were giving a voice to their experience. So yeah, absolutely, it's really important how it's portrayed.
And how has the show been received?
Well, it's opening on Thursday night in the Axis, International Women's Day, which I'm excited about.
Have you had a couple of dress rehearsals or anything yet?
Well, as I say, we've toured it to the agencies, so it's unusual in that while it's opening, I've seen it performed in front of audiences in the workshops for the last 6 months, and it's been received really, really well, particularly the humour. I mean, after he goes for a swim, he goes on an internet date, and that gave us a lot of scope for fun.
Yeah.
And it was disastrous, so it was sad but also funny. So it gave us room to explore that from his perspective, which is different to most people going on an internet date. You know, he had to brave it because he knows he's on methadone, of course, so he's different to other people.
Yeah, and so what's the plan then? It's in the Axis, it's in the Five Lamps. You're showing it in some interesting places: the Sean O'Casey Theatre, Dolman Theatre in Cornell's Court.
That's right. Yeah.
The Viking Theatre in Clontarf. They're all kind of niche venues, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, I'm from Ballymun, so Axis, and obviously I did my course there, so they're really supportive. They were very keen for me to come back, so that's why we opened there. Anto's from East Wall. The Sean O'Casey Theatre. The Viking and the Dolman Theatre gave us an opening when he toured with Peter. They were really supportive, and they allowed us to go up as his support act. So we're going back to those. And the Five Lamps Arts Festival, Peter would have a long relationship with them, and they've lots of really interesting events. So they've been very supportive. Okay, well listen, it's the play is called Love in the Wild. It's by Lisa Walsh. It's on, as we said, in the Axis, starting on Thursday and the 8th and Friday the 9th. We wish you every success with it, Lisa. Hope it goes well for you. I'm sure it will. It sounds great. Thanks a million.
And keep doing what you're doing. We've loads of texts coming in Kilkeel.